today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Set to make her next ring appearance on the undercard of Shields vs. Marshall, unbeaten up-and-comer Georgia O'Connor. Georgia debuted as a professional late last year in October, made her ring return earlier this year in April. She is one of many Sky Sports and Boxers Valkyries that will be in action on the undercard of Shields vs. Marshall. Given that her contest is not yet registered on BoxRec, we don't know who she's going to be fighting or at what weight. Though because Georgia O'Connor is a very young fighter, very early stages of her career. I mean, she's only 22 years old. When she debuted as a professional in October of last year, that was at middleweight. Her very next fight was at junior middleweight. It was right to assume that Georgia O'Connor, like many professional boxers before her, might debut at one weight and subsequently move down in weight after a few fights. I could very much see Georgia O'Connor campaigning as a welterweight in the not-so-distant future, where April Hunter campaigns, where Summer Lynn, Chi-Town's own Summer Lynn from the Windy City, fights out of the Body Shot Boxing Club. Careers handled by trainer and manager extraordinaire Rick Ramos. I could see April Hunter, Summer Lynn, Georgia O'Connor. This could very much represent the next wave of welterweights. Factor in any fighters that might be moving up in weight in the next couple of years from 140 to 147 pounds. Fighters like Sandy Ryan. Fighters that might either be moving up in weight or moving down in weight, depending on what opportunities await them at welterweight, where Jessica McCaskill currently reigns as that division's undisputed champion. You have to figure that Jessica McCaskill won't reign as that division's undisputed champion forever. Sometime in the near future, something might happen, titles might change hands, or titles might go vacant, at which point fighters might start ascending and descending to the welterweight division, depending on what opportunities are there. Georgia O'Connor might be one of those fighters. Sandy Ryan might be one of those fighters. Summer Lynn and April Hunter, they're already there. If a title goes vacant, at 2 titles, at 3 titles, I could see a fighter like Georgia O'Connor making her way to the welterweight division. I could see her descending to that division. I could see Sandy Ryan ascending to that division. It all depends on what opportunities pop up and when. For now, Georgia's going to be returning to action later on next month on the undercard of Shields versus Marshall, and she is definitely one to watch out for. Keep your eyes peeled for Georgia, who's going to attempt to advance to a professional record of 3 wins, no losses, and no draws. Let's see what happens. Interesting news in reference to veteran journeywoman from Brazil, Simone de Silva. It appears she's going to be standing in for Kim Wabik. Kim Wabik, who is supposed to be facing Canada's own Jessica Camara this upcoming weekend. Simone de Silva will be standing in her place. She'll be facing Jessica. Jessica's coming right off that loss she suffered to Kaylee Reese in their competitive super lightweight title fight late last year. And this will be Jessica Camara's first fight this year against veteran journeywoman Simone de Silva of Brazil, who, if you know the sport of women's boxing, you know Simone de Silva, and you know that she's been in there with just about anybody and everybody. And that's not even the most interesting part, that she's going to be standing in for Kim Wabik this weekend against Jessica Camara. The real interesting part is she's also set to return to action next month against none other than mixed martial artist, UFC and Bellator champion Cris Cyborg, a Brazilian countrywoman. The fight with Jessica Camara this upcoming weekend is supposed to be a lightweight contest. Lightweight, that's 135 pounds. That's where Katie Taylor reigns as that division's undisputed champion. Whereas the fight with Cris Cyborg, that's supposed to be up there at middleweight. Middleweight, that's 160 pounds, 160-pound limit. Set to go down late next month on the 25th in Curitiba, Brazil. We know that Cris Cyborg's name was very recently attached to a potential Katie Taylor crossover fight, though discrepancies in weight issues made the fight seem unrealistic to me, and this is what I'm talking about. Cris is set to make her professional boxing debut as a middleweight, whereas Katie Taylor, for the most part, as a pro, has campaigned as a lightweight. There's a noticeable discrepancy in size between the fighters, and I don't think Cris Cyborg can get further down than junior middleweight at best, 154 pounds. The most Katie can get up to is, 140 pounds? The max, because Katie Taylor sure as hell ain't no goddamn welterweight. This makes that proposition of a potential Taylor versus Cyborg fight seem somewhat unrealistic. Now, there are other fights and other names out there for Cris Cyborg. She could have a crossover fight with the winner of Shields versus Marshall down the line. It all really depends on how serious her endeavor into boxing is. I mean, is this just all about getting 1 or 2 fights in before a cash grab, or is this a serious effort to become a genuine pugilist, a legitimate prize fighter in the sport of boxing. It really all depends. The one thing we know is if she's fighting Simone de Silva in September, she's not fighting Katie Taylor. I think that Cyborg has done all there is to do in the sport of mixed martial arts. She was a champion at the UFC. She's currently a champion in Bellator. Does she have what it takes to become a champion in the sport of boxing? Can she become a legitimate pugilist, a legitimate prize fighter in the squared circle? Well, there's opportunities out there. She's got name value. That gives her advantages that most other girls starting out at these weights don't have. Things are gonna get interesting. In men's middleweight news, some comments from Showtime executive Stefan Espinoza are getting a lot of attention. Showtime had on Charlo versus Andrade. The time has already passed for that. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. I firmly believe that both Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade's careers have suffered for them having not fought each other, having not unified titles at a time when the fight between them would have been ideal. Two homegrown, unbeaten two-division champions in the middleweight division. What the hell else do you need? Stefan Espinoza was quoted as saying, "I don't hear anybody except for a few notable people who are pushing for Charlo versus Andrade. I don't really see. It's not something I see on social media when I'm out in public that people say, that's the fight you have to make. I just don't. A part of it is Andrade hasn't been as visible as he's been on DAZN fighting guys who don't even have the biggest names. I just don't think there's a whole lot of demand for it." But there was a demand for Charlo versus Montiel? There was a demand for Charlo versus Maciej Juliecki before that fight got scrapped, before it got canned. Was there a demand for any of those fights? Compared to an Andrade fight, which fight were people demanding more? Andrade or those two guys? Stefan Espinoza knows the answer just as much as I or you. You want to say that Demetrius Andrade's fights weren't visible because he was boxing on the DAZN platform fighting against guys that don't have big names, but what big names has Jermall Charlo been fighting, and what was their visibility compared to Demetrius's? You can't make this kind of argument when it comes to Jermall Charlo because the logic collapses in on itself. Espinoza said while there is a possibility to still make the fight, he believes there are far more consumer-friendly and consequential matchups for Charlo than a ring date with Andrade. That includes a fight with either 168-pound contender David Benavidez or 168-pound undisputed champion Canelo Alvarez. I'm not saying we wouldn't do it, make Charlo versus Andrade, or that it's not possible, but to me, the time has already passed. The time has already passed for that, Espinoza said. That fight peaked a while ago. It's not nearly as exciting as Charlo versus Benavidez or Charlo versus Canelo. There are better opportunities out there. The question is Charlo going to capitalize on those quote-unquote better opportunities when Canelo Alvarez is on DAZN right now? That's where his fights happen. That's where he boxes. He's not on Showtime. David Benavidez is, but Jermall Charlo's been skirting around that fight for approximately 2 years now. It was about 2 years ago when Jermall Charlo said that he would move up in weight to knock out David Benavidez. That's what he said 2 years ago, and he still hasn't done it, though he's been on the same side of the street as that guy for a while now. David Benavidez himself was rumored to be facing David Morrell this fall, but those plans have since fallen through. So will Jermall Charlo move up in weight and make good on his word? Now that David Morrell is out, is Jermall Charlo in? He, Demetrius Andrade, decided to re-sign with DAZN, Espinoza said. He even, after the fact, made the comment. His comment was, if DAZN is going to keep paying me millions of dollars to fight guys like Luke Keeler, then I'm going to re-sign. That says everything you want to know. That's fine. If the way you want to go, there's a lot of ways to carry out your career. If that was his preference and he wanted to cash in on that money, that's great. But then, don't say Jermall Charlo won't fight you because it was there. And it was a healthy offer, and it certainly wasn't anything that he couldn't have gone and fought for DAZN afterwards if he wanted to do that. There have been opportunities, and they just have not come through. Stefan Espinoza likes to be very cryptic whenever this fight is brought up. Well, what, you offered Demetrius Andrade something? Is that what you want us to believe? Well, did you offer Demetrius what the people at DAZN and Matchroom offered Jermall Charlo? You know, $6 or $7 million. Is that what you offered Demetrius? Because if it ain't... Well, I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me that Demetrius Andrade ain't a $6 or $7 million fighter, but newsflash, neither is Jermall Charlo. That didn't stop DAZN from offering Jermall that kind of money. Is that what you offered Demetrius Andrade? We all know the answer. Underneath it all, we all know. Jermall Charlo knows, and so do his fans, the ones who like to be very disingenuous whenever this fight is brought up. What they like to do is pretend that the offer made to Jermall Charlo wasn't real. It wasn't a real offer. Well, let me tell you something. What? The money that Mikey Garcia made at DAZN was real enough. himself, and Daniel Jacobs, and Andy Ruiz, and Jose Ramirez, a top-ranked fighter. The money was real enough for them, but it wasn't real when it comes to Charlo. Oscar Rivas made over $1 million just to box Dillian White, for God's sakes. But you want me to believe that the offer to Jamal wasn't real? And that's not something that Eddie Hearn or one of his acolytes said in an interview. That's per Oscar Rivas himself. He made over $1 million fighting little old Dillian White. But I'm supposed to believe that the money they offered Jamal wasn't real because you pole smokers say so? You're making excuses for this guy. So is Stephan Espinoza, saying that time for this fight has already passed. Yeah, it passed because you let it. And in place of a Demetrius Andrade fight, what the hell did you have Charlo doing? What? Sergey Didivianchenko off a loss? Juan Montiel? What? What did you have him doing in place of a Demetrius Andrade fight that certainly would have been more attractive, grabbed more attention than what he actually ended up doing on your side of things? Let's just call a spade a spade. Charlo's handlers, alongside Showtime, kept him out of that fight, and they didn't give him anything better in its place. That's what happened. Neither Stephan Espinoza or Al Heyman wanted Charlo to cross over to the DAZN side of things. They wanted to keep him where he was, and in doing so, what has he spent the time doing? Has his career taken off yet? Do you hear this guy? Still talking about a Canelo Alvarez fight. You question Demetrius Andrade's visibility because he's been boxing on the DAZN platform, but that's where the cash cow of boxing also boxes. The face of boxing in this part of the world. The guy who your platform offered $100 million for just 2 fights. But you're trying to convince me nobody knows about DAZN and nobody watches it. Nobody's subscribed. You want to talk about nobody? Nobody's seen Charlo fight all of this year, and that's what you've got going on for that guy. That's what's staying on that side of the street has gotten him. Back injury, fucking back injury, my ass. Yeah, maybe he actually did hurt his back under the weight of all the excuses he's been making over the years to avoid Demetrius Andrade and subsequently avoid his PBC stablemate, David Benavidez, calling out Canelo Alvarez, who has better things to do. Canelo doesn't need you. When are you going to understand that? Stephan Espinoza says that the time for an Andrade versus Charlo unification match has long since passed, and maybe he's right. The part he's leaving out is that they're the ones that let it pass. They're the ones that let that parade go by. What you wanted to do was sit on your hands and wait for Canelo Alvarez. Keep waiting, motherfucker. I hope you bought a crossword puzzle to help you pass the time. And what are they about to do for Charlo? Who is this guy gonna fight if he fights at all this year? Who is he gonna fight? Stephan Espinoza himself mentioned David Benavidez, who was supposed to be boxing David Morrell in the fall, but those plans have since fallen through. So will Charlo stand in his place? Because Stephan's the one that brought him up. Finally, in men's heavyweight news, CompuBox's Dan Canastota. Dan Canoli reacted to the news that Deontay Wilder may be facing Robert Helenius this fall in order to rebound off his consecutive losses to Tyson Fury. And Dan said, Wilder going from Luis Ortiz to Tyson Fury to Robert Helenius is pretty damn impressive. Major props to him. Is that really impressive? No, not really. It's a solid little fight. Don't misunderstand me. It's about as decent a rebound fight as you can hope to stage for a fighter who's coming off of 2 consecutive losses, 2 consecutive systematic beatings. It's a decent fight, though. Impressive? No, it's not impressive. This is the same Robert Helenius who was stopped many years ago by Johan Duhaupas. Johan Duhaupas, who was stopped by Deontay Wilder. This is the same Robert Helenius who was also stopped in more recent memory by Gerald Washington, yet another guy that Deontay Wilder stopped. This is also the same Robert Helenius that was decisioned by Dillian White. You know what it is? It's a decent rebound fight. That's all it is. It's a decent rebound fight. Why are you trying to make it out to be more than what it is? It's impressive. He's fighting Robert Helenius. Was it impressive when Gerald Washington did it? Was it impressive when Dillian White did it? Why is it impressive when Deontay Wilder does it? Yeah, these guys, they do this a lot when it comes to Deontay. Always try to give him extra credit for what are run-of-the-mill situations, run-of-the-mill fights. I mean, the fight is intriguing. I'm not denying that. But to say that it's impressive, well, that's a step further than I'm willing to go. I'll say that it's an intriguing fight because Robert Helenius is a decent enough boxer, shows a decent jab, good dimensions for the weight, not much of a discrepancy in ages between Deontay Wilder and Robert Helenius. In terms of ages, they're only 1 or 2 years apart. Robert Helenius is 38. Deontay Wilder's 36, going on 37. It will have been a year's time since either fighter saw action the night of the fight in October, assuming they get this one over the line. I think this fight could yield a similar aesthetic to the Gerald Washington fight in the sense that Robert Helenius could be having mild success. Mild success in the early goings of the fight, as he is riding high. He is coming off of 3 consecutive victories, whereas Wilder, he's got some rebounding to do and some ring rust to shake off, and he could lose those early rounds to Robert Helenius, who at least to the eye is a more coordinated boxer, shows more of a jab, a little bit more of a work rate, decent power, though I think Wilder's got him beat in the power department, and I think in this fight, Wilder's power would bail him out. It would avail him. It gives me the impression that it's the kind of fight that Robert might actually be winning up until he gets dropped, up until he gets stopped, as I think Deontay has more than enough stopping power to stop Robert Helenius. If Johan Duhaupas can stop you, and Gerald Washington can stop you, Wilder can stop you. You know, Robert Helenius looked real capable against Adam Kovnowski, but Adam Kovnowski ain't Deontay Wilder. He ain't got his size, his height, his wingspan, and he ain't got his power. Deontay's a little bit more cautious, more careful than Adam Kovnowski, whose bread and butter, at least in the past, was volume punching, throwing punches in bunches, standing right in front of the guy. That's not exactly what Deontay Wilder does. Deontay bides his time and oftentimes loses rounds waiting to set up the big right hand, waiting for that opportunity to fire the cannon. Remember, Deontay Wilder's not a prolific puncher, doesn't have much of a work rate, so in all likelihood, he could be losing rounds in a Robert Helenius fight. Losing rounds up until he lets the right hand go. Some people question Wilder's durability and his punch resistance at this point, having lost 2 back-to-back fights by knockout to Tyson Fury. I understand those people, but those people must also understand that Robert Helenius got stopped by lesser punchers than Deontay Wilder that don't have his length, his right hand, and his explosivity. He got stopped by Duhaupas, stopped by Gerald Washington. Robert's durability ain't all that great either. Don't forget that Tyson Fury might have stopped Deontay Wilder 2 times, but he really had to lay into him to get him out of there. If Robert Helenius tries to lay into Wilder the same way that Fury did, well, he ain't got Fury's punch resistance. You start laying into this guy, letting your hands go, you're open to be counted. I don't think Robert Helenius will take one of those big right hands from Deontay Wilder as well as Tyson Fury did 4 times. Bottom line is, I think Wilder can stop this guy. He can knock him out.